Before we begin, have you had your warm glass of water this morning? It's good for the heart, especially when today's story might just break it a little. What would you do if your husband might be dead at sea? And the only thing your mother-in-law asks is, who's paying for the funeral? This isn't just another toxic mother-in-law tale. It's a real moment of heartbreak, betrayal, and a cold-hearted question that changed everything. So stay with me, put yourself in her shoes, and let's talk about family, loss, and the kind of mother-in-law you never want. Imagine this. You're 24, a newlywed, just starting your life with the man you love. He's out at sea, literally, serving as a merchant marine, making an honest living to build a future with you. And you? You're at home, grading papers after dinner, thinking about what kind of surprise you'll plan for when he gets back. Then the news breaks. An unidentified oil tanker is on fire off the coast of the Carolinas. Your heart stops. That's the exact route your husband's ship was supposed to take. You call his company. They can't confirm anything. Protocol, they say. You reach out to a friend whose husband is on the same ship. Nothing. Everyone's in the dark, and every passing second feels like you're sinking right along with that ship. Now let me ask you this. In that moment, when your world might be falling apart, who do you expect to reach out with comfort? Your parents? Friends? Maybe your husband's mom? Well, here's where this story takes a turn, and not the kind anyone expects. The phone rings again. It's her, your mother-in-law. And instead of asking how you're holding up, instead of offering even a sliver of comfort or shared concern about her son, the very first words out of her mouth are, "If something happens, who's going to pay for the funeral now that you're married?" Let that sink in. This wasn't just a toxic mother-in-law moment. This was a masterclass in emotional detachment. A woman so focused on finances or control that her first thought wasn't about her son being alive or dead. It was about the cost of burying him. Can we pause here for a second? I want you, especially those of you who've dealt with narcissistic mother-in-law behavior, to imagine how that would feel. To hear that, in that moment, from someone who should have been in tears with you, someone who should have asked, "Are you okay?" but instead asked, "Who's footing the bill?" This isn't just husband-mom drama. This is family betrayal at its rawest. It's the kind of emotional gut punch that doesn't just change how you see a person. It changes the way you define family. And it makes you wonder, was it ever about love? Or just about power, control, and money? These kinds of crazy MIL stories might sound unreal to some, but to others, this is way too familiar. We've seen it, lived it, or know someone who has. Whether it's over a wedding, a baby, or a moment of crisis like this, there's always that one comment that reveals everything. So let me ask you, have you ever heard something from your in-laws that changed the way you saw them forever? Was it just words, or did it open a door you couldn't close again? Let's talk about it. Let's go back to that moment. The phone call has ended. You're sitting there, stunned. The woman who raised the man you love just asked about funeral expenses before knowing if her son is even alive. And not with panic, not with tears, but with cold, measured indifference. So how do you react to something like that? Well, for her, it wasn't screaming, it wasn't crying, it wasn't dramatic. It was silence, stone-cold silence. She hung up the phone quietly, without a word. And then? She cursed like a sailor, her hands shaking, heart racing, grief mixing with fury. Because in that moment something broke, not just the hope that her husband might be okay, but the trust, the illusion that his family would ever be her family. This isn't just a relationship drama podcast story. This is real life. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that kind of emotional betrayal, you know what I mean. There are moments in life that split time in half, before it was said, and after. This was one of them. Now here's where it gets even more complicated. She didn't call back to explain herself. No apology, no clarification, not even a follow-up text. It's almost like, for the mother-in-law, this wasn't shocking at all, just business as usual, just another one of those narcissistic mother-in-law moments that people brush off with, "Oh, that's just how she is." But how many times do we excuse toxic behavior under the mask of personality? How many toxic family dynamics get normalized simply because we don't want to rock the boat? Because here's the truth: when someone shows you who they are during a crisis, believe them. This wasn't a slip-up, this was a reveal, and that reveal planted something inside our storyteller. A line she didn't know she had was crossed. From that moment forward, she would never see her mother-in-law the same way. Civil, sure. Distant, absolutely. But close? Never again. It's a pattern we hear far too often in these crazy MIL stories, people revealing their true priorities in the worst moments. And unfortunately, it's often money. Not love, not connection, not concern. So let me ask you, if someone you barely know says something cold, it stings. But when it comes from family, does it hit different? And more importantly, when that line gets crossed, should we always forgive? Or is distance the healthier choice? Because in some wife versus mother-in-law stories, it's not about who wins, it's about who protects their peace. So here's where the story takes a quiet, powerful turn. Hours passed, no updates from company, no news on the TV, just the heavy weight of silence and fear. Imagine pacing in your living room, replaying the last conversation in your head. Not the one where your husband says, "I love you," before shipping out, but the one where his own mother basically asks, "Who's paying to bury him?" It's no longer just a toxic mother-in-law issue. It's a moment of pure isolation, because the one person who should have shared in your fear, who should have cared about her son's life, chose to talk about the cost of his death instead. And so, when the call finally came, when her friend confirmed that it wasn't his ship that went down, something changed inside her. Relief, yes. Tears, of course. But also, resolve. She didn't call her mother-in-law back. She didn't send a message. She didn't say, "He's okay." She just let her wait. Let her sit in that same darkness. Let her find out the next morning from the news, just like the rest of the world. Now, some people might say that was cold. Others might say it was the perfect revenge. But in truth, it wasn't revenge. It was protection. A boundary, quietly enforced. And isn't that something we see often in these narcissistic mother-in-law stories? Where someone refuses to be held accountable and the only option left is distance. This wasn't about being petty. It was about choosing peace over proximity. And from that day forward, she stuck to it. Civil when necessary, polite in public. But emotionally, she never opened that door again. And you know what? Her life was better for it. That's something we talk about a lot in this space, on this relationship drama podcast, the difference between forgiveness and access. Because sometimes people think forgiveness means they get to be close to you again. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean rebuilding a bridge someone else already burned. So here's what I want to ask you, especially if you've ever dealt with a crazy ML story, or felt torn between your spouse and your sanity. When someone crosses a line so deeply, should we ever go back? Or is walking away the bravest, kindest choice we can make? Because at the end of the day, not every family betrayal ends in a blow-up. Some end in silence. And that silence, sometimes, speaks the loudest truth of all. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever had to smile in front of someone you no longer trust, just because they're family? Because that's exactly the emotional tightrope our storyteller had to walk for years after that moment. She didn't cut ties entirely. She didn't scream or fight. She didn't go on a warpath of toxic family revenge. Instead, she chose a quieter path. A colder one, perhaps, but far more controlled, civil, cordial, surface level, but never close again. And here's the thing, it worked. There were still birthdays, holidays, the occasional phone call, but the warmth, vulnerability, gone. She never let her narcissistic mother-in-law get past her guard again. Some people don't understand that choice. They'll say things like, "But she's your husband's mom. Maybe she didn't mean it. Family is family." But you and I both know blood doesn't excuse betrayal. And in this case, that betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't physical. It wasn't even public. It was subtle, cold, sharp, and it came at the exact moment she needed comfort the most. That's what makes these Just Normal podcast stories so relatable. They reveal the little moments where someone shows their true self, and you can't unsee it afterward. Because when someone asks about funeral costs before even confirming their son's fate, that's not love, that's not concern, that's calculation. She didn't need to hear another apology or excuse. She didn't need her Minilil to explain she was just scared too. No. What she needed and never got was basic humanity, and so she made a choice so many of us quietly make in our own lives, to disengage, to protect herself, to rebuild peace, one boundary at a time. What's interesting is that from the outside, her relationship with her mother-in-law might have looked normal, polite smiles, small talk over coffee. But inside, she had completely redefined the terms. And that, my friends, is one of the most powerful relationship drama podcast themes we ever talk about. You don't need a dramatic ending to begin again. Sometimes, the drama isn't in the fight. It's in the decision to never fight again. Now let's be real for a second. If this had happened to you, what would you have done? Would you have confronted her? Gone no contact? Tried to forgive and forget? Or, like our storyteller, would you have chosen quiet revenge? The kind that doesn't punish, but protects. Because this isn't just a crazy Minilil story. It's a mirror for so many of us who faced emotional betrayal from family and had to redefine what family really means. So let me leave you with this. What do you owe someone who fails you in your darkest hour? And more importantly, what do you owe yourself after that? So here's the part nobody really talks about. What happens after the silence? After the choice to distance yourself from that toxic mother-in-law, what comes next? Well, sometimes it's peace. Other times it's guilt. And in many cases it's both, cycling back and forth like waves you didn't ask for. For our storyteller, the years that followed were oddly calm. She never confronted her narcissistic Minilil, never brought up the cold-hearted funeral comment again, never demanded an apology. Instead, she kept her boundaries tight, her words polite, her emotions guarded. And honestly, that takes strength, a kind of quiet strength that doesn't get enough credit in these wife versus mother-in-law stories. It's easy to picture these dramas as explosive, shouting matches at Thanksgiving, screaming over baby names, just Namil podcast chaos in full swing. But the real, long-term impact of these moments, it's quieter. It's watching your spouse navigate birthdays while pretending his mother didn't say something horrifying. It's showing up to family events and smiling, even though deep down you remember exactly who she is. And it's in those quiet spaces that a lot of people, especially women, build their resilience. Now, our storyteller isn't angry anymore. She doesn't stew over it, she doesn't dwell, but she never forgot. Because when someone shows you where you stand in their world, especially in a moment of fear and vulnerability, you remember and you adjust. That's why this isn't just a crazy mill story, it's a real-life example of choosing emotional safety over forced family roles. And it's something so many people, especially in their 50s and beyond, understand all too well. We grow up believing family is everything, but stories like this show us that not all family deserves access to your heart. And hey, let's be honest, not every toxic family Reddit story ends with a dramatic confrontation. Some of them end with grace, with distance, with silence that speaks volumes. And now, I want to hear from you. If you've ever had a moment where someone in your family crossed the line, how did you handle it? Did you stay silent? Did you draw a boundary? Or maybe you're still figuring it out? Leave a COS in the comments with one word. Distance, if you've ever had to pull away from someone in your family to protect your peace. Or respect, if you've managed to rebuild a better relationship after a toxic moment. It's that simple. No long explanation, no pressure to share details. Just drop distance or respect, and let's see how many of us have walked this road. You're listening to another real-life relationship drama podcast moment. Thanks for being here, for listening, and for holding space for these conversations. I'll catch you in the next story.